Welcome, heathens and witches, to the Horn
and Cauldron
podcast pub chat. Yeah, so we're back at it again. Running a little late. May have had a misunderstanding of what we were supposed to be doing next on the podcast. That's fine. That happens. Anywho, thanks for joining us. I don't know if I said this already. I'm John Norgrove. This is Julie Norgrove.
That's right.
This is our witchy podcast. If you listen to us on our podcast network of choice, on your podcast network of choice, leave us a review. That's how we know that you listened. And if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like this video, comment below, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and do all that kind of stuff. And then we're just going to get right into it. So we're going to start off like we always do with a question from you guys. So if you have any questions, you can comment on the videos or hit us up on social media or anything like that. So what is our question?
So, our question is from one of our patrons, and the question is asking if we've ever used a spirit board, aka Ouija board. If so, why or why not, and why are they always so paired with dark beings and activities? So before we talk about what our experience with Ouija boards is, I want to mention that we did talk about Ouija boards briefly in our first pub chat episode, which was seances versus Ouija boards. What's the difference? We also talked about a magical golf tee find, and we talked about some movies in magic and media. So first off, a Ouija board is a brand name. A spirit board is what they are, and Ouija board is the brand, which happens to be owned by Hasbro. It's weird to me to think that a toy company owns something so esoteric as a Ouija board, but their spirit boards are usually used as a divination tool, and they're not inherently evil.
Sure, of course.
They either use spirits or your unconscious or higher self to get messages to the user, and they actually date back all the way back to the 12th century, particularly in China is the oldest mention that we have of spirit boards. Yeah. But they became hugely popular in the late 1800s during the Spiritualist movement. We talked a bunch about the Spiritualist movement in relation to seances in that pub chat. Super interesting stuff. So I highly recommend you listen to that because we just don't really have the time to go into that in this episode. I mean, technically, I guess we do, but we're not going to do that here. That's not what pub chat is for.
No. We can always deep dive into Ouija boards and spirit boards and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, if enough people have questions.
Yeah. So, it's really common to see that Ouija boards are associated with dark or evil forces, and especially in pop culture. And that is really largely thanks to the Catholic Church, who decided that Ouija boards were akin to divination, which was considered a satanic act.
Yeah.
And it sort of snowballed from there. And the divination side of things and like dark entities kind of go in two different venues, right? So they considered that these divinatory practices were a satanic act because before this, they were like a parlor game in the 1800s. It was like fun time.
Yeah, totally.
But they, the idea behind it being a satanic act is sort of stems from this belief within the church that if you are doing divination, then you're trying to get information that only like the capital G Christian God should know. Mm-hmm. And that was evil. Mm-hmm. And that was bad, and only witches did that, and then it became a satanic kind of thing to make it even more evil.
Sure.
And then it went to demons, so you can kind of see the links in the chain there of people just sort of demonizing this particular type of divination. And that's really why we have that, because there's that, and it's still like a wide belief among many people today that you can get, hooked into dark beings and stuff like that.
that a Ouija board or a spirit board are intrinsically evil. I mean, from my perspective, the way that I see it is that the church, and I mean, in reality, like just Christianity TM, sort of made an effort to demonize anything that allowed you to have a spiritual connection or
that was not routed through a member of the church.
Or situation.
Yes.
Outside of physically attending church, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to control a population, the best way to do that is to make the only access to deity or to, you know, their god or whatever be through your route, right? I mean, it's functionally like what happens if a cult gets so big that everybody just accepts it as not being inherently
They
absurd.
also talk about that in Kevin Smith's movie Dogma.
Right. But on the other side of that, I would say the modern interpretation of Ouija boards are evil and whatnot is primarily a function of the movies that came out of the Satanic Panic, right? Because you had the movies that were like, all right, we got to make a scary movie, teens, Ouija board, ghosts. That's a straight line.
Yeah.
You don't have to do very much from a writing standpoint to justify it. It's evil. You know, it's evil, like scary movie afoot. At the same time, you have the other side of the coin during the Satanic Panic where like more auteur filmmakers were trying to like be as dark and gritty and bloody and push the envelope and like, you know, rock and roll and sex and Satan and drugs and all this kind of stuff as you could. So including things like a Ouija board as like, so, you know, it's sort of like throwing a pentagram up.
Well, and
right?
it's easy
a pentagram
to
has a specific
find a
meaning,
Ouija board
but if you
too.
just slam pentagrams all over the place in a movie that's vaguely evil, then you automatically are like, that shit's evil, when a pentagram isn't an intrinsically evil symbol.
Exactly.
Right?
Same thing with Ouija boards.
So same thing with Ouija boards or spirit boards overall. It's just that Ouija boards became the, like, you know, it's like saying like a Kleenex or Q-tip, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
and
you know,
regardless
it's
of
the brand, it's the brand name that we like to use.
They're like super easy to get. You can just go
to
down to a
Toys
store
R Us
that
or
has
some
like
shit,
board
dude.
games
Yeah.
and pick one up. So
Yeah.
it takes something that is inherently like common and turns it into something spoopy. And, you know, that's really it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's no different than it's that fascination that exists everywhere, you know, in all different things. It's, you know, it's like, have you ever seen all those bloody Bible Code History Channel shows that came out, you know, or just any of that, like, you know, like ghost hunter shit. It's real easy to just sort of like take a sort of simple idea, and then because of the success of a couple of properties, it like becomes this big deal. Like, it's insane to me that like Ouija boards are owned by like a kids board game company, but also, from my perspective, like, yeah, I understand that, like, in movies, Ouija boards are evil, but, like, also in movies, sometimes cell phones can transmit sexually transmitted haunting diseases. So, like, you know, why are we going to believe that? And to me, a Ouija board's more of, like, a kid's toy.
Have you ever used one?
A Ouija board, like, maybe once or twice when I was, like, real young, just as one of those, like, there's a Ouija board in this house, let's do Ouija board shenanigans sort of a thing. But it's like not particularly like my bag with regard to like actual practice or anything to that extent. Especially like a Ouija brand board. I mean, I think like a simplified yes no spirit board, or like a general like spirit board used for seances a little bit more like, that's kind of cool, you know, something handmade. But like the, like, you know, tan box, yellow box, like Ouija board Hasbro symbol in the corner, that's a toy. Right? That's Monopoly or Chutes and Ladders or any of the other board games from my perspective.
Yeah.
Not that it can't be used for something. I mean, you can use a set of playing cards for tarot divination. So like anything can be used for anything. But to me, a Ouija board isn't like an intrinsically magical tool, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's just like stream of consciousness writing or anything else like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What about you? Have you ever used a Ouija board?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to preface this by saying I was like a goth witchy kid in like the 90s. So, of course, we used a Ouija board. I remember using Ouija boards like at sleepovers, you know, when I was like in middle school, in between like crank calling like Safeways that were open 24 hours. We were weird. We weren't even really that weird.
You did
kids,
crank
to be
it,
honest.
and then you were just like, connect me to the train conductor.
No, but it was a corded landline phone with
right?
like push buttons.
That works.
Yeah. So yeah, like I mean, I remember doing that kind of stuff, and we never had any thing happen.
Yeah, like
when I was using it. And
thing,
I've made like spirit boards out of like, literally a piece of paper and another piece of paper with like a hole cut in it.
Yeah, sure.
And that sort of thing. I've never had anything at all paranormal associated with those. Although I have a huge number of paranormal stories just in general. I've never had anything paranormal associated with Ouija boards.
Well, yeah.
But
mine's the same thing. Like a Ouija board is like a sleepover toy.
I actually do have like evil Ouija board story. So I come from a relatively small family.
A land down under.
I come from a land down under. Yeah. I have a relatively small family, and one of my aunts, she had used a Ouija board when she was in her like teens, and this would have been like the mid 70s that she was in her teens, and it like really, she like was alone, she was playing with the Ouija board, and whatever happened, she was like really scared of whatever happened, whatever entity had contacted her. And it like, according to like stories from my family, whether it's like stories from my mom or sort of like pieced together stories from like other family members, it like attached itself to her, this entity, and like followed her around for ages. And she kind of never really broke free from it, and was like still like haunted by whatever this entity was. And it's difficult to say really what it is because she wouldn't even really talk about it. Mm-hmm. But my aunt also has had issues with like alcoholism and mental health associated with that. So it's possible that she's using this Ouija board not as an evil entity, or like as a conduit that an evil entity like got attached to her, but more along the lines of it kind of didn't help her mental health and was a way for her to sort of move into this path that she was going. So that's my family has like evil Ouija board story, but at the same time, I don't know that that's really a thing. There's a lot of people that talk about like, oh, I'm like cursed, or there's like an entity that's following me and it's bad. But I mean, the reality is like that happens so few and far in between. And it just seems like it's everywhere because that's what's in pop culture. That's what you see all the time. But you're not going to sell a movie about some kid using a Ouija board and nothing happens.
Well, I mean, if you were a good writer, you probably could.
So that's my experience with Ouija boards.
Well, I mean, I think the thing with a Ouija board is, I'm for a lot of this stuff, I generally tend to be a bit of a skeptic with regard to things that are too obviously like pop culture movie, like horror movie hype. It's too easy, regardless of the fact that, like, again, theoretically anything can be used for any sort of divination so long as you have like the presence of mind to do that. But it's that thing, like in a movie you always see like, the planchette starts moving or the cup starts moving, as if they do the kind of the glass cup, when the cup starts moving and they're like, you moved the cup. No, you moved the cup. I didn't move the cup. What are you talking about? Shenanigans, right? Yeah. So like, it's one of those things where like, I'm often like, well, is it a thing, or are we just in a state of like hypersensitivity? And so like when you're moving the cup and then like, whatever, a mouse crawls underneath the house over in the corner, and like jiggles a wire, or like a door creaks because of a slight pressure shift, due to the wind change or something like that. And you're just like, ghosts sort of a thing, So it's one of those things where like, I don't know, Ouija boards are sort of interesting, especially because they've become this sort of like commercial, it's like a Freddy Krueger mask.
They sort of,
It's this like commercial horror toy that has sort of lost its connection. At least, again, the like Ouija TM boards owned by Hasbro. In my opinion, feel like they've lost a lot of their connection to like the classical like spirit board or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know. What do you guys think of Ouija boards? Have you ever had a experience with one? Comment below in the dibbly do and let us know like what your Ouija board story is. That would be super interesting.
Yeah.
So next up is story time. We're going to talk about Helena Blavatsky.
Yeah. So this is actually kind of a really cool pub chat because all three of the things that we're talking about here are actually related. And the medium, like the link that chains all of these things together is actually Helena Blavatsky. So she was a well-known occult figure and was primarily associated with the Spiritualist movement of the late 1800s. And so we talked about that briefly here with the Ouija, with the spirit board thing and the Spiritualist movement. We also talked about that in Pub Chat episode 1, and I think we've maybe mentioned a few other episodes. But Helena Blavatsky was a powerful psychic, or she was a fraud, depending on who you talk to.
Yeah.
And after a terrible accident and a coma, found that her powers had increased. And not only could she make contact with the other side,
glowing eyes just
which was a
through
thing
town.
that she did. She was very into Ouija boards and seances and all that other stuff. But after this accident,
was like very hype.
Yeah.
Right? It was like crazy
and then after this accident, her powers were like Scarlet Witch.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like she awoke.
Yeah.
Her
powers are overnight.
She came out of this, she woke up from this coma and she was woke. So she could like not only make contact with the other side, although she didn't necessarily believe that the things that you interacted with in a Ouija board or in a seance were ghosts. She had some very interesting and sort of contradictory beliefs about that. But she also was able to read people's thoughts, control their consciousnesses, and access the quote unquote traveler within. This actually led her to create her own religious belief, shall we say, called Theosophy. So there's a lot that goes into Theosophy, and we really don't have time to talk about that in a pub chat, but we do have plans to talk about individual different like pieces of occult and heathen and pagan religions as future show things. So we're going to talk more about that later, but I want to hit on this because it is there are so many things that are so interesting out there. And I think that this is one of those things that's kind of like silly, kind of like funny, definitely like a weird pagan water cooler kind of thing that you can talk about. So through the experiences that Helena Blavatsky had, she believed that all religions on Earth stem from one original global religion or a secret doctrine that ancient philosophers like Plato and older like Hindu and Buddhist mystics had access to. And she believed that this global religion was sort of like shepherded by a secret organization that held the keys to it and helped to kind of like husband it through the earth. And that this organization also included men called the Masters, who were highly evolved, like mentally, not necessarily physically, but they also were like long-lived, not immortal, but very long-lived.
Sure.
And they helped to preserve humanity's oldest religion
Yeah.
and sort of work on this tangent for the current iterations of religion, like Christianity we're talking about, and we're talking about even Hinduism and Buddhism and basically anything that's like a modern religion now, and usurp those and put in place this one global religion that is sort of just like everything spouts from a particular godhead and all things are one thing and we are all one people. And Helena Blavatsky she wrote several books about this. There's quite a few scandals about this. In a way, Helena Blavatsky's contributions to the occult sphere, and so in so doing that, like with the pagans, definitely is on par with Gerald Gardner. Like you can't really call her the father of Wicca, but she's a lady or anything like that. But she has a huge amount of things that she has contributed to in the modern occult world that we just kind of like forget about.
Well, she would be the mother of Theosophy.
She is definitely the mother of Theosophy.
Yeah. Or progenitor, or originator of Theosophy. I mean, this idea of like one single Earth religion that's like secretly being manipulated in the underground by these long-lived masters who were like preserving this and whatever. This just feels like.
She was also married to a guy who was a Freemason for a while.
Nice.
So
this
always comes up.
This feels a lot like that Illuminati secret government, like shadow government.
Absolutely.
Like it feels very conspiracy theory.
Absolutely. And that's not the only thing about Theosophy that there is. Like there's other pieces. There's things that talk about reincarnation and the afterlife.
Yeah. It's just that those
a
pieces
variety
are
of
the
things. But that's
ones,
the ones that I wanted to mention today.
Yeah.
And that's really because Helena Blavatsky, being the middle link in this chain to the next piece of magic and media, is that we recently watched a show called Archive 81. And in it, they talked about this Blavatsky witches and this Blavatsky cult. And she didn't really have a cult and they weren't really witches, but she did found a society that was similar to other like occult societies in that time. And some of the story beats in Archive 81 definitely were reminiscent of Blavatsky's teachings, which I'm fairly familiar with, just like in general. And that's how all of that ties together. So for Magic and Media, we're going to talk a little bit about Archive 81. Which is a show that we watched. What was that on? Netflix.
Yeah, we watched that on Netflix here in Northern California.
Yeah, so this is a generally spoiler discussion, although we're trying to make it so that we're not giving away all the bits and bobs.
Yeah, we'll do a standalone review of Archive 81 at some point, probably, just to get into the like finer details and maybe do like a little like discussion go through of the ending. Of it, because it does have a pretty interesting ending. But like surface level, Archive 81 is sort of mystery, mostly horror, a little bit of occult. They use
definitely paranormal.
Yeah, definitely paranormal. They use some pretty fantastic set design, sound design, and camera trickery. As this, as the story progresses. And it basically follows a gentleman who is tasked with simply digitizing some tapes, right? Some old camera tapes. And in the process of doing so, like uncovers a secret cult, what with like actually does some magical shit, or whatever. It's a really good show. It's parts of it are a bit predictable and parts of it were very out of left field. I'll tell you what, the main character puts up with way more shit than I would. This guy, like, he's like, I'm gonna do this normal thing. I have this spoopy experience. And then he like freaks out for 5 seconds. He's like, I'm going to sit back down and do this. It's like, no, motherfucker, get out of there. What's wrong with you? Like, but
he also makes some choices that I'm just like, I would never make that choice.
Yeah.
I keep coming back to the moment where he's like, what's this wall in the pantry? Looks fake to me. And then just like busts through a wall. I'm just like, dude, this is like a company house that you're staying in?
I don't know. At that point in time, he was in deep enough that like it makes sense. I would have broke through the wall.
Yeah, that's fair. But there is a lot of like very interesting mentions to occult things in this, and the there's they talk about Chiron, who's the ferryman. They talk about demons. They talk about Blavatsky. They talk about cults. They talk about a lot of different sort of pieces there. And there's sort of like a secret religion that you can see there, and you can kind of see.
And like it kind of goes like back through time. It's they do a really good job, like, kind of keeping you at the edge.
Yeah.
But, like, feeding you enough knowledge, and you don't necessarily have, like, a bunch of unnecessary audience knowledge that, like, you know the answer and the characters are still, like, well, trying to figure it out or whatever.
Yeah.
Except for the obvious, you know that this shit is dark and evil, and this guy is still, like...
Still just letting it happen.
Trying to figure it out.
Letting it happen.
Near him or whatever.
Yeah.
But, Archive 81 was really good. Highly recommend, especially if you're into, like, occult stuff and horror stuff and things of that nature. It's a pretty quick watch. It's, like, 8 45-minute episodes.
Yeah. It was less than what, like, a standard, like, Netflix season would be.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad. But
we really enjoyed it. But we're also huge horror fans.
Yeah.
So the suspense and the horror elements really did it for us. And then the added bonus of the sprinkling of, like, occult things. And I want to be clear in this. They weren't taking Helena Blavatsky's theosophical beliefs and putting them into this movie or this show. What they're doing is they're referencing someone who has something to do with this sphere. And then, as you watch it, you can go like, oh, yeah, that is kind of like this thing that works, that sort of like falls together. It's like more like paying an homage, not like taking a They do definitely have their own path with regard to like the finer details of things that they're doing. But again, not to get into spoilers or anything, highly recommend. Super good. It's sort of not specifically following any one practice. Yeah.
It's very like its own creation and hints at a bunch of stuff. So stay tuned for a deeper dive sort of review into that. We'll probably rewatch it so that way I can get like a refresh on it. So that way we can go into the finer details of it. Because it's definitely got a bunch of twists and turns.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely got a bunch of twists and turns. But then next up in Magic in Media is just a brief talk about future plans for Magic in Media as a standalone thing. So obviously we'll still have these like sort of brief discussions about the stuff that we've watched Magic in Media style here in these pub chat episodes of the podcast, but we're also looking at spinning Magic and Media out into a standalone like full-length episode, not like podcast episode, but like YouTube movie review on our YouTube channel. So if you're not following us on YouTube and you are just listening to this as a podcast, we're making YouTube videos under the channel name Nerd Jive, where we cover a bunch of different kind of stuff. And that's also where the videos for the podcast are, if you want to look at our silly faces while we talk, or have a conversation, because YouTube comment section is easy conversation place like that. But the idea is to watch, movies or shows or anime or something to that extent, and then do like a longer deep dive specifically into that with a bit more structure. So that way we can kind of like dial all that stuff in. This is a byproduct of feedback we got and ideas that came out of our Fanime podcast episode panel thing. So so we're going to be moving forwards with that. So if you have any like movies or TV shows or anime or other media based content that happens to be have something magical in it that's interesting, and you would like to hear us talk about it, hit us up in the comments below or on social media or wherever. So that way, we can put that on the list and then check it out and, shoot a review and talk about it and analyze it.
And talk about the magic.
Have a discussion about it and talk about the magic in it and where it relates back to actual practice or like history, or if it is made up, what informs the practice. And where the line between like historical accuracy and like the creative element of writing sort of falls. So stay tuned for some of that. That should be fun and exciting as we expand what we're doing on our YouTube channel to just produce more content for you guys.
Yeah.
So with that all taken care of, we're just going to quickly thank our patrons. Alan, Miranda, Alexa, Helena, and Adrian. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. We're getting back into the swing of things. So
after some life changes and crazy last minute projects, we're getting
anime
back
and a bunch
to
of stuff. So we're getting back to normal, and we'll keep moving on with that. So thank you for the patrons, and if you are interested in joining our Patreon or supporting us, head over to Patreon. We're
nerdjive.com has links to
nerdjive.com has all of our stuff. So you can check out our Patreon there. You can also support us by, obviously subscribing to the YouTube channel and sharing us and, following the podcast and all that kind of stuff, as well as hitting us up on social media. Again, links everywhere.
Yep.
And we have an Etsy shop, so you can always check out that. If you're crafty, we do a lot of craft stuff. So check that out. And next up is going to be, our next episode is going to be episode number 41, Midsummer 102.
Yep.
So stay tuned for that. And then Pub Chat episode number 10, we're already at 10 of these guys, comes up after that at the end of the month. So stay tuned for that one.
Yep.
So that should be fun.
And keep an eye out on our YouTube for other types of videos. We do reviews for Star Trek and also Orville, and we're going to be talking about, we already talked about Magic and Media being its own show, as well as project videos of the wild and wacky and very intricate and high-end sewing stuff that I do as part of my projects, which includes probably some videos for some flower crowns too. Yeah.
So stay tuned for all that stuff, and we will catch you guys next time. Either way, I've been John Norgrove. This has been Julie Norgrove. This has been The Horn
and Cauldron
Podcast Pub Chat, and we will catch you guys next time. Stay magical, folks.